much for being here. My name is Michelle Wilson. I am the author of Leaning on Jesus, Strength for a Woman's Heart. I've invited these wonderful women here today so we can have this fantastic conversation about women in the scriptures and how we can relate to them and how we can become inspired by them and how they can fill our lives even more. First, I would like for all of us to do quick introductions so you can meet my friends, and then we'll go from there. So let's start with Heather.
I'm Heather B. Moore, and I write and publish with Covenant Communications. A lot of biblical novels or Book of Mormon novels, and also nonfiction on women in the scriptures.
I'm Stephanie Sorenson. I write with my maiden name as well, so Stephanie Dibb Sorenson. I am a mom, 3 kids, great husband, and just try to do that most of the time, but I also love to write, and I also teach part-time at BYU in the Department of Church History and Doctrine. I especially love to teach about living prophets. So I've written a couple of books that are nonfiction, inspirational. One's called Covenant Motherhood, and the other is a workbook about Jesus Christ throughout the topical guide. It's based on President Nelson's challenge to read everything about Christ from the scriptures, and that's called Learn of Me. And that's it.
I'm Laura Edvalson, and I live in Bonnie Lake, Washington, and I am the mother of 5 children. We've lived in Washington for a long time, but I grew up in the Bay Area, California. That's where I was born and raised. I've spent most of my life working in music, doing choirs and private piano and voice lessons. Love music, and that's been a big part of my life. I've been a seminary teacher, lots of different variety of callings in the church, and just happy to be here and love reading this literature and learning about the women in the scriptures.
My name is Kim Robinson. My husband Quinn and I have 4 kids. We live here in Washington State. We met at BYU, and I graduated in communications, worked in communications for a little while, and then had children, did photography, and now I'm teaching in our school district. But I love the gospel and the scriptures and women, so this is exciting. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. I've invited you all here because I know people watching this might not know you, and it's fun for them to get to know you as we all get to know each other. And I also know that each of you have a testimony of women in the scripture. And when we think about women in the scriptures, you know, we think about, okay, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, but I think it's also valuable to look at women in church history and even women that are leading us today. So if any of those women have inspired you, you're welcome to talk about them today. So I guess the first question is, as we're going through this difficult time, what has been a way that you've been able to look at a woman in the scriptures and draw upon a characteristic, a strength, or something that perhaps has helped you in the past 2 months where our world basically has gone upside down? I know for me, I think about Noah's wife a lot. You know, she's sheltered in place with disgusting, you know, what do they call them? The rats, the mole rats. And I just think, I'm just glad I'm not her. And that's basically... Basically, I'm just glad I'm not Noah's wife. But what do you think? Have you had some women come to your mind, or in your reading come across something that you'd like to share?
I'll start because one thing that I've thought about, Elder Holland, in the church news, he gave an interview where he talked about how this shelter-in-place time is a time to get to know ourselves well and find out if there's things we'd like to change about ourselves. And so that's something that I have felt pretty keenly, that when we're kind of in these trapped and closed circumstances and our relationships become a little bit strained, or we're just kind of staring our own self and our weaknesses right in the face, right? That we can kind of start to work through some of those things. And with that in mind, a couple of things that have been inspiring for me is just to remember the power of doing a few simple things right, even when we get a lot of things wrong. And so a couple of stories from the scriptures that come to mind for me for that is Mary, the mother of Jesus, we don't know a whole lot about, we know the very beginning of her story, and we know like her at the crucifixion story. We don't know a whole lot of the in-between, and anyone who's a mother knows that all that in-between would have been so tumultuous, right? And I was teaching a gospel doctrine lesson once about the atonement and about Christ in Gethsemane. And as I was talking about like the part of his prayer and teaching about this, you know how sometimes you learn something completely new while you're teaching. I said something about how he was so willing to sacrifice his own will for the Father. And in my mind, I had this sudden like flashback that went to Mary when she received the news that she was going to be the mother, and how she said how she was going to be the mother of God's child, and how her response was, "Be it unto me according to thy word." And I thought, and all of a sudden I had this kind of aha moment. I don't know if it's completely true, but I feel like it is, that the skill, the characteristic that Christ needed in the moment of the atonement to be able to turn his will over to God was something he learned from his mother. That she had been the one that had said, "Be it unto me according to thy word," not what I want, but what you want, right? And I thought, and here in the most important moment in the history of mankind, maybe it was her example that made it possible for him to do what he had to do. And I thought that was the most powerful thing, because what if Mary wasn't good at anything else? I don't know. I mean, I doubt it. She was, chosen because she was wonderful, but maybe she did make lots of mistakes. But in one thing that was so important, she was obviously a really good example. And I think there are so many times like that in the scriptures where the child in a moment of conversion or something like that remembers like one thing from a parent's testimony or a parent's example, and that's what gives them the strength to do what they need to do. And so to me, while I'm in this tumultuous time and completely aware of the fact that I'm doing a lot of things wrong, I'm trying to take faith in the fact that if I stick to some really important things and try as hard as I can to do those right, that can have a powerful influence down the road sometime when it might be more appreciated and more needed, and that God can use that in whatever his purposes are.
Yeah. And not only that, but for me as a mom, that takes so much pressure off myself, because I know that we want to be all that our kids need and all that everybody needs. And I'm thinking, man, sometimes I think I don't do anything right, but I can do one thing right. And I think maybe that's why God gave our kids to us, because of that one thing that they're going to need later. So I appreciate those comments, because it makes me feel, that I don't have to feel guilty for the 99 things that I that I struggle with. I can do one thing.
I think this whole time that we've been going through the COVID-19, it reminds me of the women in the scriptures who didn't have all the answers. They didn't know what the future would bring, such as Sariah. We all know Sariah's story of, first of all, when she left her nice home in Jerusalem and left behind valuables and her husband's property and her husband's wealth to basically go camping for 8 years. And of course, at the beginning, she didn't know it was going to be for 8 years. And then in Michelle's book, she brings out when we hear about Sariah's murmuring, and we can really relate to that. But then Sariah had this huge trial of faith. And this, for some of us, this could be a trial of faith, is being in a quarantine situation and not having the answers and not being able to take a break. I always have a very structured schedule, to fit everything in I want to fit in. And I've had to really change that. I've had to change around my entire schedule, and that is very hard for me. But I've loved the messages we've received from the general authorities and the prophet about focusing on what's important. This with General Conference, focusing on the restoration. These are core things we should be building our testimonies on, and not worrying about things that we don't have control of, but in our faith, doing the worldwide fast, all of these things, you can see reflected throughout the scriptures in these women, like the wife of King Lamoni, when her husband, they thought her husband was dead, and Ammon was perhaps the one that killed him, but she didn't know how, and she had to really put her faith, really dig deep into her own heart to and not have all the answers to all of her questions, but to really just listen to the Spirit. And I think that that those have been strengths to me, because I don't know what tomorrow will bring, or the next week, or the next month. None of us could have predicted this pandemic in the way that it's affected the entire world. My daughter is on a mission in Texas, and she's been holed up in an apartment, but she's done amazing. She's transitioned. It hasn't been easy, but she's transitioned to online teaching and contacting through Facebook, and she has miracles that are happening. And I think that if we look, we can have miracles every day if we really look for those, and really look for those tender mercies, and find ways to be grateful in times of trial, in times of heavy burden.
Yeah, the person that came to my mind when you asked that question, Michelle, was Emma Smith. And I don't remember exactly when it was, but last year sometime the prophet asked us to study that section in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 25, about her, and it was a revelation for her. So this may not be so much about her, although we also know she did some amazing things and had these amazing qualities. But I love the words to her, the advice given to her about murmuring not, and being a comfort to her husband and consoling him, and expounding scriptures, and giving time to learning and studying much and writing much, and not seeking for things of this world, but of a better. And all of that advice has been something that has been helpful to me during this time, to remember those things that were told to her. She was certainly one who went through an awful lot and managed to come out. But all these women who go through this, and mentioning Sariah, they get to this point where they have their problem, where they do murmur. And, I do that a lot. And and it's often from exhaustion. And you mentioned that in your book, Michelle, which I thought was great, because I had written just a month or two ago in my journal when I got to that part in the Book of Mormon this year, and it was like, this woman's exhausted. She's hit the end of her rope. I've been there many times, and this is what we do. This isn't her failing. This is just being human. And unfortunately, it's seen as this big mistake that she makes, and that type of thing. And maybe it was put there so that we can all feel better when we do the same things, to know, see, this wonderful woman, she gets exhausted too. And that's what happened.
You have to put that in the scriptures, right? Nephi didn't have to put that in there. And so you remember who wrote that? It was Nephi that put that in there about his mom. And so you think, okay, what's the purpose? What's the purpose? And I love her reaction. So, she's being stretched, she's exhausted. And I wish that I want to get a t-shirt that says, what happens in shelter in place stays in shelter in place. My best self, and
yeah.
not.
I was going to say, in response to Heather's comment about that, in these difficult times, we might have little miracles and things like that. And sometimes the miracle is simply the fact that we did not give up that day. Like there are those days when you are exhausted and you might want to hurt people and you don't. And there is a miracle in that, because it took some kind of strength beyond your own to be able to pick up and keep going. Right. And so, joking aside, sometimes it is miraculous that we're able to just move forward when there are so many moments where you're like, okay, done. I am done with this. And we have our Sariah moments, and, everything's ridiculous and we're over it, and yet we still manage to kind of step forward again. And from that point where we feel that, it feels like it would be a miracle to move forward, but we manage to do it,
I keep having these Mary Martha moments where so many dishes. The kids are all home. We're all home all day. There's so many more messes. We're wearing this house out so much quicker than ever. And then I have to physically stop and mentally slow down and remind myself, like, there's more to this than just cooking and cleaning and keeping the homework going. There is a beauty to this moment that I think the whole world is being given to stop and see. You see all these reports of the earth being more still, it's vibrating less, nature is doing better. Like, there's so many good things coming out of this horrible pandemic, and there's so many bad things coming out of it too. But you have to stop every once in a while and listen to the spirit. And I think just what can be learned from this, what can be gained from this, what can be good. I mean, I've had to look at the bright side of this the whole time, just to mentally prepare for those long homeschooling days, or for the mess in the kitchen, or for whatever, and just remember to just put that down for a minute and go listen to the spirit, go listen to the Savior, read the scriptures, or just find out what I can do to keep going through all this and help others around me. And, you know, for those struggling, I mean, the same for them too. What can be learned from this? What can be gained? And what can we do for those people? And my goodness, Mary Martha, I mean, yes, the work has to go forward, but there's still a higher work, a more important thing too. And trying to keep that perspective is just so key to the success, I think, of our day.
Well, and to keep that balance too, because I tend to lean towards the Martha side. You know, I get up and get your kids up, and you got a routine, and you got to keep them on, and I have to remind myself to, maybe it's okay to relax. But I think that there's people on the other end of the spectrum who are, you know, the way that they're surviving is to not Martha at all. They're just watching Netflix and eating all that they can. And I think that that's okay, right? If that's what we need to move forward, that's okay. And I love the fact that the women in the scriptures, they're not perfect. What is it? Is it Sarah that was complaining a lot in the scriptures?
Well, Sarah, Abraham's wife, she was the one that had the handmaiden come, because she couldn't have children, and that was her duty. And Abraham had all these promises made to him that he would populate the sands of the earth, like the sands of the earth. And so so she was making the best out of her situation in a very, very difficult manner.
But she complained and she was frustrated. And I love the fact that the women in the scriptures show that it's okay to be frustrated. You can be frustrated and have faith at the same time. And I'm grateful for that, because I get really frustrated. And going back to Sariah, I know we're talking a lot about Sariah, but I just love her example of, you know, when she did have that moment of weakness, exhaustion, trial of faith, whatever you call it. And then the boys came back, and she says, now I know with a surety that, you know, that God is real and this is it. And then she moved on. You know, there's no record of her beating herself up going, remember that one time I was so weak? Why did I even behave that way? She just moved forward with faith. So I think one of the important things that I take from these women in the scriptures is that when they had an experience and they grew closer to God, they grew in character. From the records that we have, it seemed that they walked in that light. They ascended a little bit and they kept going. And I think as women, it's easy for us to make a mistake and then go, okay, learn from it. But then we don't let it go, right? We keep going back. I mean, what if Sariah, like the rest of the way there, was like, do you remember that time I doubted? Why did I do that, Lehi? You know, why can't I just be more like, you know, so-and-so's wife?
Maybe she did though.
Yeah.
You know, maybe she did, because we only get what Nephi noticed.
And he wrote it like, you know, and who knows how many years later.
Where we as women ruminate about all these things that we worry about, and our kids and our husband, they have no clue that we're like falling apart inside, because we're just going around doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. And I think the thing that's cool, because I don't want to refute what you're saying, because we don't really know what she was thinking. She may have beat herself up.
We don't know what's recorded.
She did keep going.
Yeah.
She did keep going, and she didn't like give up, in the sense where she was, you know, whether she was disappointed in herself or whether she was able to move past it, she kept going and kept doing the next right thing.
In a Come Follow Me lesson this last week, they said the word retain, a remission of your sins, several times. I don't know if you guys noticed that. And it caught my eye finally, like the third or fourth time. And we discussed what that word means. Why does he keep using that word? And I think that comes in handy here. Like, we've already been forgiven. We're going to keep that. We're going to retain, just keep that remission of our sins. We're just going to let that go, that sin we had or whatever. We're going to keep that forgiveness forever. And I'm so glad they put that. I think they put that in there for people like me who do ruminate or go back sometimes and can't let it go or move on. And I mean, just, we've already been forgiven. We're just going to retain that. We're going to keep that. We don't have to keep going over that again. I mean, I'm so grateful for that one little word that was in there. It made a big difference to me this week.
I think there is something in us as women that long to see other women succeed, that long to see the example of other women, and even a connection with them. And so I know for me, as I've been able to study them and learn more about them, I felt more connected, and they've become more real to me. And I think sometimes we can forget that, yeah, they maybe they did ruminate, maybe they did have a hard time forgiving themselves. Maybe they did beat themselves up. I'm sure that they went through what we went through. You know, they cramped, they cried, they were hungry, they laughed, they sang to their kids, they love their husbands. And so I just love the example that we have in them, that in extremely different circumstances, we can see the resilience of women. And that helps me now, because right now our circumstances are really different than they were a month ago, 2 months ago, and we don't know where things are going to go. So one of my big takeaways is just that word, is that resilience. If I can just keep moving forward, if I can take a little piece of Mary, if I could take a little piece of Sariah, if I could take a little piece of Esther and go, okay, maybe it was, you know, for such a time as this that I'm really going to shine. I'm waiting for that to happen. It hasn't happened yet. My kids are waiting for that to happen. But yeah, I love everything that you guys have said. And I love that we have the ability, that we have these scriptures to go back and read about them.
Michelle, I agree with you. I often wish there was more written about women too, but I think of today, all the women that are writing these blogs like you guys and these books, and what a record future women will have because of all the work that you're doing. It's interesting to me. I don't know if women, you know, anciently wrote and had that ability and desire like they do now. It would have been fascinating to see some stuff written firsthand, but I am thankful for what we do have. I'm so thankful for, I think Eve is just such an amazing human, and how she worked side by side Adam, and how they were equals in the work that they did, and they worked together to raise their families, and they worked together to till the earth and all those things. And I love that she gets so much credit in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Not everyone looks upon her as favorably, but the fact that she was inspired to make the choices that she did, that she saw truth and understood it and helped Adam in the way that she did. I think she's so inspiring for women today. I mean, she was the first woman, yet I think she was such a valiant, you know, daughter of God, and is such an example for women today who can be making decisions and working alongside and doing the great things for her family and her husband and herself even. I mean, it's just, she's awesome. So I'm so grateful for what we do have, because I do look up to them and I do appreciate their examples.
Yeah, I was just going to say too that I have also felt inspired many times by the women in the scriptures that we don't know. So for example, the mothers of Alma the Younger and the sons of Mosiah, we don't know anything about them at all, like nothing. But I do know, like President Boyd K. Packer taught, never underestimate the power of a mother's prayers, right? And we know that when Alma the Younger had his conversion experience, the angel mentioned his father's prayers, but I know there were mother's prayers. I mean, I know that there have been moments in my life where, you know, my children in their own scale have their little sons of Mosiah type experiences or things like that. And I feel the despair of that, and knowing how much strength and effort I have to put into turning that over to the Lord, and not just letting it consume me with worry or fear or things like that. And so I often think about some of the mothers of people in the scriptures, like the sons of Mosiah or Alma the Younger, or, you know, some that we just don't know about, and wonder, I mean, I can guess at the power of their influence and the power of their prayers and the role that played in the development and the conversion of their children that we read about. We know one side of the story, but I think that they are often kind of the unsung hero in many of those stories.
Well, it makes me look at us. Okay, so we've been talking about these women that lived years ago, right? So how are future generations going to look at us? I think we tend to put these women in the scriptures up on these pedestals and go, they are amazing, and they're amazing. And they are, but what makes them amazing are their qualities and their faith. So the women of today, I think a lot of us can be really hard on ourselves, but I think there's so much strength. I mean, just look at you four. There's so much strength and so many wonderful things. What do you think people 100 years from now, hopefully by then Jesus will have come. It's a new different place.
Like next weekend.
Right? Wouldn't that be great? Well, after next weekend, because my writers' conference is next weekend. It's like in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks would be good. But, just think about the women that you know in your life. What are some of the things that you think people in the future would say about the women in our lives today?
I think obviously, well, our generation, the temple work, and we have, I can't remember how many temples, Stephanie might remember, but they announced at conference. And because a couple hundred years ago, there wasn't temple work and we're redeeming our dead. And I remember being, and then waiting to do one of the sessions, and someone sat by me and she said something about how she goes 3 times a week. And I thought, wow, she is doing, maybe someday I'll be able to go that much, or even serve in the temple and spend a lot more time doing temple work. That's something that generations before us haven't been able to do, but we can do ourselves.
I think that there's a lot of importance in our histories, in our keeping our own histories and passing that down, and the histories of the women in our lives. My mother taught me a lot about her mother and even her mother's mother, and we have a lot of pioneer heritage, and there's a lot of great stories out there. But there were things that I found out only 5 years ago that I didn't quite grasp, that somehow got lost a little bit. And as I shared them, when I found out and told them to my own daughters, it was a very powerful moment to learn. My great-grandmother was the first woman tabernacle choir organist. She was an assistant organist back in the day. And, my grandmother was a fine vocalist and singer. My mother was a singer, pianist, and she played the organ for years in church. And I play the organ, and I do all the, and this connection back. And this one daughter of mine is very musical. Well, they're both musical, but she's been an organist, a singer, and all that. And the finding out about that, about what my great-grandmother did, and the whole story, and then we started researching it together, and we were just like, oh my gosh, she had 3 children when she did this. I couldn't do anything when I had 3 children, and she was doing all of this and accomplishing all these things. But that is, they say, who do you want to, if you could pick anybody alive or dead you want to have dinner with, who would it be? Okay, that woman is on my list.
When Kim talked about how now we write blogs and stories and things like that, and that will be what other people read, there's something frightening about that, right? Like we're like, do we want, here we are, the social media, we've put it all out there, and someday somebody's going to know it all and judge us by it or whatever. And that's scary. But I think that there is a lot of power in being vulnerable and sharing our real, true struggles and our problems and things like that. When Laura was sharing her example about her great-grandmother or whatever, I had a similar experience where my own grandmother, who I just adored, and I obviously only knew her as a grandmother, after she was passed away, some of my aunts and uncles put together a family history, and I read a story about her having a nervous breakdown. And it was like, I get emotional thinking about it still. Like, I was a young mother, and I had no idea that my grandmother had experienced that. I've never experienced a nervous breakdown, but I wanted to. And I felt like I probably was, but I loved and adored my grandmother, but I never felt as close to her than when I read that story about when she was a young mother with no money and ran out into the barn and hid and had a nervous breakdown because it was just hard. And my heart broke for her, and I just loved her. And when I'm having my worst days of mothering, I think of her. I think, okay, she did it. She lived, she survived. She turned into the most beautiful, like, cookie baking, loving angel grandma, and she made it, and I can too. And so I think we need not worry that our stories are imperfect, because sometimes our imperfections are just as inspiring as our successes can be.
This is gospel according to Michelle. I feel like when we remember somebody who has passed, it's almost as though they know it and a connection is formed. And I love, so, you know, when I put this, my publisher said, well, so why are you putting a section about women in the scriptures when the whole thing is about, you know, Jesus and women? And it comes to that connection. It comes to seeing them as real and helping us to feel it. But it's all our story from Eve to here. You know, we talked about family. It's all family. And when we learn things about people, when we can study it, I know that I feel closer to the four of you than I did before the call, because I've learned things about you and we've experienced things together. And I think that's one of the reasons why this whole shelter in place thing is so hard, because the level of connection has gone down, and we need connection. We need inspiration. And I really feel like spirits touch spirits when we're together. And so this has been a hard thing for me, because I want that connection. And I think there's just such value in it. So when we learn about it, and I've had the same experiences when I'm doing family history and I learn something about a relative, when we empathize, what is it? Someone once said, the three most powerful words aren't "I love you," but it's "I understand you." And I think there's truth in that, because when we understand someone, then we feel that connection, and not only connection, but we feel stronger. Like you said, on your worst day, you think about that and you go, okay, she did it, and I have pieces of her in me, so I can do it because she's in me. And I love that idea that we can do that, not only for women that we're related to, but for these women in the scriptures, for sisters in our ward, for new friends like this. I think there's such a great power in understanding, connecting, and combining our strengths. And I think the adversary knows that. And Eve never had to deal with Pinterest. She never once went, oh my gosh, Adam, so-and-so does it better, because she was the only one. I think, how would that be? Wouldn't that be great if he's like, Eve, these are the best brownies in the world? And she's like, with confidence, they are. I can't say that because we're all comparing ourselves to other people. But I think that, just the ability to connect as women. So hopefully, as we've been talking about the women in the scriptures and other people in our lives, we've been able to see these things in ourselves, that we've been able to see that, we have patience, and we have moments of doubt, but we walk through it. And I know I have cried a lot in the past 2 months, just out of...
Me too.
And sometimes I don't even know why. Like, sometimes I have a really good reason and I can come up with this beautiful long list of reasons to cry, and sometimes I have no idea why. Just leave me alone. But I have found just a lot of peace in sisterhood. And I know that that's what the Savior wants, is that he wants us to be together. You know, man is not meant to be alone, but neither are women. So I appreciate you guys being here.
Thank
you.
Thank you for your wonderful book and this good opportunity.
You know, like, can we not worry about homeschool? Can we not, like, I don't even care anymore. It's ramen. We're doing ramen forever.
For me, I am busier now than I was before. So I see these women that are like, I am so bored. I have nothing to do. And I'm like, come,
strangle him.
Right? Of course, most of it is self-imposed. My husband's like, you have 6 1-hour left. Why are you doing this? It's art. Why?
I'm like, I maybe need a little more Martha in my life, because I've thought about the Mary and Martha thing. Like, it's one thing, like I could sit at Jesus's feet forever, but eventually he's going to get hungry. So we need a Martha.
True.
You know,
It was fun. And someday we'll see the Zoom meeting of all the women in the scriptures in heaven talking about us, going, oh my gosh.
Oh no.